This is the Ecom Edge podcast, and I'm your host, Sergio Iacobucci, Director of Product Marketing at Coveo. For all of us in e-commerce, there's a certain thrill that comes from adopting the latest innovations. From peeling back the layers of different technologies to getting inside our customers' heads and providing them with profitable shopping experiences that competitors can't match. Hello listeners, this is the Ecom Edge podcast brought to you by Coveo, the first e-commerce podcast focusing exclusively on how enterprise brands and teams like yours can be smarter with data, technology and resources to get an edge. I'm your host, Sergio Iacobucci, the Director of E-commerce Marketing at Coveo, and as always, you can expect today's conversation to bring you new approaches and tools for e-commerce growth and profitability. We're very excited for today's guest, Mark Patchett. Mark has extensive experience in e-commerce, from being the marketing director at Trouva through to recently founding Growth Shop, a business that helps accelerate brands' growth in e-commerce. In this episode, we touch on approaches to growth, the pitfalls to look out for, and the issues around profitability. So it's so great to have you on the show, Mark. Welcome.
Pleasure to be here, man. Great to be talking about this.
Yeah, and we've been excited to have you on for a while. You know, you've got some great and amazing experience in the world of e-commerce. Maybe just by way of introduction, could you take us through some of your time at Trouva, what that was like, and then more recently onto founding Growth Shop?
Sure. So Trouva was a very fun ride. So the founders, Mandeep and Alex, were kind of genius level guys. And then Mandeep had a lot of background in private equity. And then Alex was like a prodigy on the development side. So you kind of fuse those two guys together, and they had that right balance of like scariness, but everything they said was extremely reasonable. So when I kicked off with those guys, it was like the stories of the early days of, like Amazon, where we had like a bell that would go off with every sale, pinging into Slack, and you'd wait. You could go for lunch, and you'd come back and be like, "There's another one." And then towards the end, it was just absolutely blasting, and it was amazing to see a business like that, particularly that had a good cause. So it was helping independent boutiques take their inventory and sell it to the world. Yeah. So it was an amazing ride, getting to work with some brilliant people and scaling something very quickly. Yeah, I love that model as well. It reminds me of Farfetch, if you're thinking from a retail perspective. Helping independents kind of bring their stuff to sort of a global showcase. But it's brilliant. I love it. And, we've shopped on there loads of times. We absolutely love it in our household. So yeah, it's great. And what about founding Growth Shop? What led to that? How's that been? So Growth Shop was an idea that I had for quite a while. So my background was initially in the agency space, which I loved from the perspective of getting to work across just a shitload of different brands. And when you're in the agency side, you have this expectation that you're going to know as much about someone's business as they do, but in a week. So you get really, really good. Then I shifted to work on side businesses like Trouva, and you get to see that you can know so much in the agency land, but unless you're inside the business, like, you don't understand the implications of something going really well, then that product goes out of stock. Like, how do you deal with that? So how do you try and integrate marketing teams with ops teams? So I had that with Trouva, and then I was VP of growth of a company called Nectar Sleep. And the job there was to build a globally distributed team to take them from 10 million upwards. Went really well, got to 240 million in 18 months. Nice. That was tough. But the interesting thing that came from that is that we built out this entire team. And when you get to this certain scale level, you can bring on the best email marketer, or you can build out a large data team. And even if they're the best that there is, they still have this diminishing returns of ability to impact the business, because really good people can get about 80% of the big wins done in 3 or so months. Yeah. So the idea of Growth Shop was to build that full stack type of team you'd see in, a funded company or a successful company, but then to partner with multiple different high opportunity direct to consumer brands that wouldn't know how to build the team or how to manage the team, and then run them all in parallel. So that was that idea.
That makes sense. And because obviously, a lot's changed, right, in the last, let's say, 10 years in the world of e-commerce. What have you seen in terms of changes in e-commerce, and have you felt that they've been gradual, or are they like quite seismic shifts? It's like jump from one stage to another, and that's suddenly the customer expectation. What's your feeling on that?
Oh man, 10 years in the e-com world. It's like dog years. Uh, some of them have been more gradual. So the customer experience has shifted. So the obvious one is the almost annoying impact that Amazon's had with things like, 1 day shipping.
Yeah.
So it that set an interesting expectation for what people realize what's possible. But then the expectation for e-com brands to deliver the same, that took a few years for people to start demanding that. And then it took even longer for the market to catch up. So now you see things such as like Shopify's 3PL super, super quick. So some of those changes were, sorry, man, you say something?
No, carry on.
Yeah, some of those changes were more gradual, but then there's the big ones, like things like the iOS shift that was like a slap in the face, and that thing just ripped around the corner.
Yeah.
So that was big. And then the other one that has been really, really interesting, that's been a little bit more gradual and then sped up, is how we communicate with our ads in terms of the types of visuals that we use. So things such as going away from really, really polished large campaigns to the introduction of things like UGC, which is an interesting challenge for bigger brands because you have to have very, very tight control over your brand's look and feel while you still want to catch on to the trend of how people are communicating now.
Yeah, of course. And I want to touch on the kind of Amazon setting some of the customer experience a little bit and, essentially like setting the playing field for what it needs to look like. I have mixed feelings about it. So, as a consumer, I like the idea of being able to get something next day. I like the idea of like quite simple returns and good customer service and all that kind of stuff. So from a consumer perspective, I think it's great. But my concern, I'm interested to see if you share it or not, is that they're setting expectations so high to the point where it's actually very difficult to create a really good business around that. When you look at Amazon's e-commerce business, just the e-commerce business, they operate on a -4% margin. So they have all the scale you could ever dream of as a retailer, really. Yet they still can't make that profitable. And we'll get on to profitability a bit later. We said we would touch on it. But what do you think? Like, what do you think it's doing to e-commerce businesses when you constantly compare to Amazon?
I think it makes it really tough because if we look at something like 24-hour shipping, that's great. But now you've got like gorillas and people want shit in 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So I think it creates these really interesting expectations that are actually above and beyond what people want. But then once they've had it for long enough, they seem to expect it, even though they didn't need it. It's like, you don't need your stuff in 15 minutes. Sometimes you do. I forgot an outfit for our work party. So I had that on Amazon Prime now, or whatever it's called. I got that in half an hour. I was like, all right, you saved the year. But yeah, I think it becomes really, really challenging, but it doesn't mean that it's like a dead end, because if you've got an amazing brand feel and you've got an amazing product base, it doesn't really matter. Like, we've got brands that we work with where we can still have 7-day shipping and it doesn't matter at all because we've created that initial desire. So exactly. I don't think it becomes like an immutable moat that people can't break through.
It's actually quite funny because Amazon set that expectation. They took a big bet on Prime, and it really did make a big difference for them and changed consumer expectation pretty quickly. But Prime's pretty expensive. Like I look at some of the smaller businesses. So I shop on a company called EcoVibe, and basically that's where you can get all your like plastic-free stuff for the house and like that kind of thing. They offer £9.99 for the whole year. You'll get free delivery. Now, it's not next day, but it's still pretty fast delivery. And I don't need it next day. And yet that's considerably cheaper than Prime. And Prime's just gone up again, I believe, but considerably cheaper than Prime. And I know they're doing it next day, but yeah, good point. Like, do people really, really need it next day? Probably not.
And I don't think they need to, because it's like, say with this eco side, you'd probably be happy if they pushed it 2 days more, because it feels like you really resonate with their concept and the problem that they're solving. So like the core problem that Amazon was solving is, one, that they want to give you a wider variety of different things that you can buy. And then two, they wanted to improve that operational experience. But it's almost like it's inverse. So it's like the importance of the operational efficiency is lessened if the brand connection goes up.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And, again, if we kind of look back over the last 10 years, obviously lots has happened in the last three, let's say. There's been a lot of growth, right? And even when you look at the proportion of retail, for instance, and the amount that e-commerce makes up of the total spend, is actually still a relatively small portion of that, but ever growing. Now, we've had a lot of growth. Growth is clearly very tricky to achieve. And I think that there's a million things out there that businesses of all sizes, but let's say for an enterprise business, there's so many options they have to try and achieve growth. What misconceptions have you seen around trying to achieve growth? Are there some out there where people try it and everyone seems to want to try it and it doesn't really work, it doesn't move the needle, or doesn't move the needle in certain industries?
Well, I think there's a lot of layers to it, and like one of the biggest challenges, whether we're talking about like enterprise down to smaller advertisers, is understanding what that composition of profitability is. So, for example, is it that Facebook's not working, or is it that AdWords isn't working, or is it that you're actually not attributing the marketing correctly? So we'll see a lot of instances where someone's like, Facebook's just not working for us. And sometimes the only effective way to really, really test it is to do controlled experiments where you may increase Facebook by 20%, hold it for a month to 45 days, depending on what the time to purchase is, and then seeing what kind of net impact it has on the business.
Yeah.
Or it could be the other way around. They're like, we think Facebook's working, and we're like, no, you're actually burning spend. So let's cut it by 20% for the same period and then see what impact it has on contribution margin or the profitability of the business.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of it comes down to actually understanding what is driving profitability.
Yeah, for sure. And probably related to that, I guess, but like what obstacles stand in a business's way in figuring that out? Like why do they get stuck at that point? I have an experience of working with businesses around trying to help them usually grow their conversion rate, now very much more around trying to grow sustainable growth within the business. But even when you look at things like conversion rate, control and variant experiments, 50-50 splits, using your proper stats model to work out what goes where. Is it the approach that stands in the way of these businesses figuring this stuff out? Do they just need a fresh set of eyes? Like what happens, do you think?
Yeah, that's always a very, very fun one. So I think it starts with the approach, but then it also needs to have buy-in. So if you're saying, all right, we're going to do a holdout experiment, or we're going to test just the impact of reducing or increasing one of our channels for a fixed period, one of the most common things that we see happens is that you do it for 30 days and they're like, shit's on fire, what's going on? Change it. And then things get cut before the experiment can actually give you good data.
Exactly.
And then it could be 2-3 days later and sales come back up, when you don't change anything. So it's not just the strategy, it's having internal alignment with any key decision maker to make sure that you can go the length of the actual experiment to get good data on it.
Yeah. I think that's where, the culture, and, I've seen it before, it's where these enterprise leaders that have a whole, department of people working with them, trying to grow the business, put in new, more effective campaigns, or, trying to generate efficiencies, whatever it is, they are the ones that set the tone for what gets done and what risks people are willing to take. Again, a good example kind of from the testing world, but people were like, oh, can we put it live? But we only want to put it live to 15% of traffic. And then they'll be a bit frustrated when it takes so long to kind of reach any form of statistical significance. It's like, because we needed to go to 50-50, we should have just done that for a few days. We would have got to statistical power pretty quickly. And then you kind of made your decision. But now we're weeks in because we're in such a low traffic split that it's taking a long time to figure stuff out. But, what culture do you think e-commerce businesses need to kind of achieve growth, and not growth at all costs? Because I think that's, lots of people can do that. How do you achieve sustainable growth? Like, what kind of culture do you need?
So the key thing here is having someone that understands growth as the blocker. So the blocker between the people that sign the checks and then the people below them that are going to make the decisions. So another common thing which becomes very, very challenging is if you've got the growth people saying X and you've got the brand people saying Y. So the growth people, so for example, if we're talking about something like paid social, you used to be able to get away with running a nice campaign. You'd have 20 assets and you could let them run for 3 months. You just can't do it. So it's like even if you've got an account now where we may be spending $50,000 a month, we're producing like 50 assets a week to test that. So I think there has to be a growth person at the top that's helping to dictate the tempo of what's being tested, and then also the buffer that can say this is how long it's got to be tested for. And then the other really critical thing, even more so, it's never been as critical now, as is having cross-functional groups that work together. So for example, instead of having the creative people deliver it to the paid media managers, it becomes a blame game. So the creatives are like, no, the creative was amazing. And the paid people are saying, no, it was a bunch of shit. It didn't work. What we do now is that we have everybody working on the same problem with one goal. So we say, this, about the mechanisms and about the algorithmic way that it's structured within, say, paid social. You've got the best idea of who the customer is, and then also brilliant creative treatments. You guys work together on producing that asset. So that type of cross-functional collaboration is absolutely critical.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's maybe not culture, but I speak to some e-commerce businesses, and actually they don't talk about profit necessarily, and because it hasn't been a KPI for them. It's been growth has been the KPI, and there's been some elements, or flushing inventory is a key KPI because they've got a load left over from a part of the season. But it is interesting how many leaders in e-commerce aren't targeted on profitability. Now, obviously some are, but it's not like it's unanimous across the group. How have you seen that's the case, or have you seen different to me, and actually loads of these businesses are targeted on profit?
It's a bit of a mix, and I'd say that even if they're not focused on profit, you've got to ask why. And if it's their superior is saying that we've got another objective, it can often be really, really hard if they're saying, no, we need to think about this in a different way, if ultimately they're still going to be commanded by those KPIs, which may be things like sell-through, maybe selling excess inventory. So we do see it. We do see it where we get adjusted KPIs, but I think it depends on what the internal culture is. But then regardless of what we're told, well, I guess you can think about it like this. So there's what someone says they want, and then there's ultimately what they need. So no one has ever gotten the shit for increasing profitability unless it came at the cost of, say, another KPI. So it's like, great, profitability is up by 15%, but we're stuck with all of this stock that we need to clear.
Of course.
So I think it has to be balanced internally, but it's also, if someone's been given a directive, I think it's okay. They need to achieve that and be creative about still achieving profitability as their secondary agenda.
Yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, obviously e-commerce has been growth at all costs. I think now that e-commerce makes up a much larger part of people's P&L. Now, if you're direct to consumer and you don't have loads of other channels, then obviously it's going to be a huge part of your business, if not the only part of your business. But if you're a brick and mortar retailer that has a digital arm that sells obviously online, as things have grown over the last few years, I think the finance teams are now looking and going, okay, we need to start working a bit better.
Hold on. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So what do you think it is about e-commerce, the model of e-commerce, that makes it so hard to reach profits?
So if it's a company that has traditionally driven the majority of their sales through retail, through wholesale, it can be tricky because they've got less price control. So if they've got these new D2C guys that are just coming out of nowhere, that are targeting something similar, that have full control over their pricing and promotional strategy, that can be extremely agile, they may not have that same level of agility. So some of it can come from just online guys being more sophisticated and faster. Then I think another part of it is that it's harder to understand what's costing you money. So you've got these massive fluctuations in CPMs. You got massive fluctuations in the transparency of the tracking. So more often than not, we still see all of our paid pieces working quite well. It's people think they're not, so they'll pull back. So I think because it's so easy to make changes in a digital context, that it's people are more prone to making bad decisions more often. So I think that can really hurt.
No, I agree. And I think that, the acquisition, we see that you can split up the costs of these businesses, right, relatively standardized across most. You've got your cost of acquisition, you've got your cost of goods sold, you've got your cost of fulfillment, and then there's like another bucket around like servicing and, support kind of afterwards. Mm-hmm. Cost of acquisition seems to constantly rise. I don't know if more recently that might have dropped. I'm not close enough to the acquisition side. You probably know better than me, but not close enough to the acquisition side to see if that's dropped off recently, with some companies probably calming down some of their acquisition marketing in recent months because of the economic situation. But acquisition is a huge cost for these businesses. But then when you think about, if you are a brick and mortar store and you might have a direct consumer, like you said, come out of nowhere, they're in growth mode, that they don't necessarily really care about how sustainable it is right now. It's not about that. It's about getting to a critical mass. So they're just constantly disrupting these larger businesses that are trying to just continue to run and kind of plod along, making good amounts of money, and they're getting disrupted by those guys. But I think what's interesting, if you break it down really simply, e-commerce versus brick and mortar, let's just do that for a second. The point of sale is just so different in comparison to buying in a store when you buy online. It's quite interesting. I used to work in the travel industry, so I used to work with some of the airlines and help them with their e-commerce strategy. And they have this concept of booked revenue and flown revenue. And that's because you can book a flight, but you might cancel it, or you might not fly, or you might change it. And the revenue isn't recognized until the moment that you're sat on that plane and you've taken off, or you checked in. And I did wonder to myself the other day whether that could be kind of true of e-commerce as well. Like, sure, yeah, someone's bought something online, but they might have bought it just to try it on. So it's not really booked revenue yet until they don't return it. And then in which case you can almost like count it and say, yeah, that was true revenue.
That's really interesting. And particularly with fashion. Some of these fashion e-com sites have got like 30 to 40% return rates. Because it's free, and it's just like having a little at-home showroom. Yeah. And we had that interesting challenge at Nectar, actually. So one of the things that nailed it there is that all of our competitors had a 100-day sleep trial. We did 365 days. Yeah. So we're selling all these beds, thousands and thousands, and you're waiting for the maturity date. And people just didn't refund it. So that's another interesting parallel actually with Amazon, where they go above and beyond. What we found was so interesting is that the majority of people, if they were going to return it, would return it within 30 days, because you don't want to have two beds. We did have college students that would just cycle through each of the companies and just have free beds for life, essentially.
30 days was kind of your cutoff, seemingly.
The cutoff, or 365 days, officially.
The 30 days was like, if someone didn't return it in the 30-day window, the chance of return was low post that point.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Like we had some that would be 3 to 6, and usually they're people that are moving house and they're like, I need a new bed anyway. I'll just take advantage of it.
Yeah, that must have been a really intense market to be in, because there were so many mattress companies all coming out and springing up at the same time, excuse the pun, coming up at the same time. And, they all seem to offer similar things, trying to differentiate through some of their marketing. And like you said, trying to differentiate through maybe the returns windows. Was there anything else you found that you could offer to try and, beat the others to that growth that those companies were looking for?
Yeah, there was a bunch to it. So the founders nailed it in terms of the positioning. So the 365-night trial, it just sold well. It's a year. The other part was the pricing. So it was a little bit cheaper as well without compromising on quality. That was like the positioning bit that was ticked off. The next bit is that the founders did a really, really good job at letting all of us that were running the growth, like Scotty and Faye, to do whatever we wanted. So we executed so fast versus the other guys like Purple and Casper. They operated these really slow, long kind of iteration cycles, so we could out iterate them. And then it's kind of what happens when you give the growth guys control. It wasn't as polished as those other competitors, but we grew a lot faster.
Yeah, of course. And that relates back right to your experience in the past, and what we both feel around having that the right culture within the right teams just enables people to make decisions, test some stuff, make mistakes, but all in the bid to like do the right thing for the business. As long as the KPIs are right, um, and you've got some people you can trust, you can kind of let them just run with it, right?
Yeah, exactly, man. Like the best autonomous management tool is always a KPI with the right reporting where it's got accurate numbers.
Definitely. Um, and I think just to kind of sum up some of this stuff, we've covered a lot in terms of how some of e-commerce has changed, things that have been gradual or sort of like more seismic shifts, and you kind of helped us kind of unpack that a bit, and then going into misconceptions around growth and profitability and why that's so hard to get. Um, as a consumer, I know it's really hard to do this because you're always looking at e-commerce stores and businesses in a certain way, but as a consumer, what's your honest opinion on the general customer experience that you get from most of the big brands that you buy from today?
So it's always a bit of a mixed bag, but the ones that are doing it best just don't lie as much. So I love how you just can't get away with areas around transparency anymore. And what's amazing about it is that the platforms like Facebook punish the brands aggressively. So if you're making claims about how quickly something's going to be shipped and it's not there, people complain on Facebook, and Facebook was even shutting down accounts that were spending tens of millions of dollars a month.
Wow, I didn't know that.
So yeah, oh, it's savage. So they send out these surveys because they understand who's purchased via their purchase pixel data. So it's always a bit of a mixed bag, but I like that you see brands getting punished that are trying to be a little bit dodgy, and then the brands that are being very authentic and truly care about it versus just having it as a value on their team page. They do really well.
Yeah, I agree. And have you had any sort of standout experiences where you're like, I don't know, this brand that I buy from consistently, or you know, they really got me bought into their brand. Um, they did this for me, and I felt like that was just great, like so spot on. I know it's quite hard sometimes to do on the spot, but
Yeah, it's so in terms of a big one, it's I think the Marriott Group has done a really good job at having an app that has purpose, and it's beyond just like the booking system. Small things like understanding preferences and then being able to have digital keys issued directly to your phone, skipping the check-in and check-out process. They've done a really, really good job. And they've tried to extend that more by taking on Airbnb with Marriott Homes and Villas, and they haven't done very well there. But with their core offering, I think they've absolutely nailed the online to offline experience.
yeah, and I think I would say my experience is probably the same, mixed bag. Sometimes I'm really, really impressed with sort of like maybe a follow up in an email that just seems very well timed, perfectly personalized to the experience that I was in at the moment. But then I think maybe because of like the industry that I'm in, most of the time I'm disappointed. I would say like I feel like when I go to someone's e-commerce store, it feels like I've never been there before, even though I have multiple times. And that's
Mm.
the bit for me. It's like I feel like that's a real basic part to get right. I know it's tough. It's easier to say than it is to do, but um, I feel like that's the basic bit that's unfortunately a little bit missing because if I have shopped from you before and bought five things, if this was a store, you would treat me different. You would remember what I bought, welcome me back. You would try and, maybe give me some sort of offer or, because you're buying again, you can have this for free, that kind of thing.
Mm.
I don't feel like that personal relationship gets made up
Yeah,
that much.
entirely, man. And I think the brands that are actually really nailing it are a lot of the brands in Asia. So we were hoping to build out some companies in Vietnam, and they were amazing because it's all purely conversational commerce, everything that is managed by messaging.
Mm.
So email there, we're like, you got to get open, you got to get running on email. It just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So like the more natural, intuitive feel was all just executed through messaging and really intelligent bots. And
So-
they were the ones that really stood out to me.
you might have answered the question a bit, but I was going to ask, how do they scale that? Is it bots purely, or?
Yeah, with bots. So it's like the only ads that we were getting to work on Facebook were like messenger ads. They just absolutely dominated it. And what was amazing there is that people wouldn't even go to the website to find pricing. So the types of questions they wanted to know were really, really easy to answer with bot flows. And they didn't need to seem like they were a person. They just needed to give someone what they wanted. They needed to give them the information they needed. So it was quite easy to build something out that fulfilled that need.
That's really interesting. I never even, because never really thought about that. I know a lot in Asia, a lot more happens commerce wise, via chat apps and things, and the likes of WeChat, etc. Payments happen over there in comparison to here. But yeah, I never thought about that being the case. But to be honest, it's the kind of experience that I want too. Like sometimes I can't really be bothered to go around and go searching. Sometimes I just want the information to be brought to me via a question, or if I like give an explicit piece of information, I kind of want an immediate response. I think it's also interesting from a commerce perspective that some of the bigger players on the bigger platforms, those platforms are incredible, right? Like they have to scale these huge businesses and fit into their current existing stacks and flows for distribution and fulfillment, etc. But I do think they need to be a little bit careful, because sometimes the experiences you get from the likes of something like a Shopify, which is somewhat standardized across the people that use that platform, are really, really good. They're moving really fast and enabling things within their customer experience that might seem trivial, but they just kind of create that extra finesse. Good example is there's a company that I bought from recently, and on the listing page, you can kind of swipe through the imagery while it's there, and you can click on the new color and swipe through all of the color of that as well, without even having to go into the product detail page. And it was just a Shopify store. I think that's probably a standard, or becoming a standard feature. But it was great. Like, it was just something that made my discovery process much simpler. And
Absolutely.
yeah, you don't want to be spending ages kind of figuring this stuff out. You just want to jump straight into it. Well, we've had a great conversation, Mark. I really, really appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much for all of your insight. Anything you want to leave our listeners with as a parting comment?
I think integrate your teams and then get people working towards the same goals. That I think is the most powerful thing that doesn't need technology. And now where we've got all of these types of data challenges, it's putting more weight on how effectively your team works as one unit to solve the right problems.
I totally agree. And if you've got that right team in place, then they can utilize the tech that is there, or they need a new piece, like they know how to put it into practice straight away. Huge part of making e-commerce successful. Well, Mark, thank you. Really appreciate everything. And thank you to everyone listening. And this is the Ecom Edge podcast. Thank you for listening. To hear more, subscribe to the Ecom Edge podcast today. Listen to us wherever you get your podcasts.